In 1971, the Nixon administration told Katharine Graham that if the Washington Post published the Pentagon Papers, she could face criminal prosecution and lose the broadcast licenses that were the financial backbone of her media company. She had been CEO for less than a decade. She had inherited the company from her husband. She had been told by almost everyone in Washington that she was not equipped for this role. But she published the Pentagon Papers anyway. And in doing so, she made a leadership decision under existential pressure that the entire press freedom architecture of American democracy rests on. Now let's audit that decision. Hello, my name is Todd Hagopian, the original Stagnation Assassin, the author of The Unfair Advantage, Weaponizing the Hypomanic Toolbox. But today, we're pulling the leadership file on Katharine Graham, publisher and CEO of the Washington Post Company, and specifically the decision-making architecture that she used during the Pentagon Papers and Watergate to navigate existential institutional threats while preserving the Post's journalistic mission. This is not a tribute, this is a forensic audit. So let's see what she actually did. Leadership stagnation score, the Washington Post in the early 1970s gets a 4 out of 10 on the corporate cancer scale. The Post was not in financial distress, but it was institutionally vulnerable in a very specific way. The separation between its journalistic mission and its business survival had never been truly stress tested before. Broadcast licenses were government regulated. A hostile administration could threaten both simultaneously. The cancer was latent institutional dependency. The Post had never been forced to determine what it would sacrifice in order to protect its editorial independence. So let's do the forensic audit. What did Miss Graham get right? The Pentagon Papers decision in 1971 is the primary case study. The New York Times had published first and was immediately hit with a restraining order. The Post had 24 hours to decide whether to publish before the Times appeal ran out, at which point publication would become legally moot. Graham's lawyers told her not to publish. Her business advisors told her not to publish. The Post was in the process of a major stock offering, and criminal jeopardy could have completely destroyed it. She consulted a Ben Bradley and her editorial team. She heard the journalistic argument for publication, and then she decided to publish. There, we went forward with brutal, honest assessment of the risk. The criminal jeopardy was real. Deep, objective evaluation of the mission. Publishing is what a press organization exists to do. Transparent acknowledgement of the decision stakes to the people who would be affected. What makes Graham's decision architecturally extraordinary is that she made it under the maximum possible pressure. 24 hours with maximum possible downside, losing the entire company, and maximum possible external pressure to stand down. That combination is the ultimate test of whether a leader's stated values are their operational values, and Graham's were. Her Watergate stewardship, allowing Woodward and Bernstein the institutional support to pursue an investigation that every other major newspaper initially underestimated, was the second great decision. She didn't manage the story, she protected the team. That's the right frame. Leaders don't create great journalism, great investigative outcomes, or great products. They create the organizational conditions where great work can happen without being killed prematurely. But let's look at the murder board. What did Miss Graham get wrong? Graham inherited a genuinely difficult professional situation, running a major institution in an era that did not accept women in executive roles. and she navigated it with extraordinary grace. The murder board here is going to be structural rather than personal. The Washington Post company under Graham built significant dependence on its broadcast licenses for financial stability, which is exactly the leverage point that the Nixon administration tried to exploit. A more aggressive diversification of the revenue architecture might have reduced the coercive potential of government license threat. The company was more financially vulnerable to political pressure than a press institution really should be. However, other than that, this was really, really good. And she gets 5 kills out of 5, which is very unusual. Katharine Graham is one of the most consequential decision makers in American institutional history, and she earns every single kill. The Pentagon Papers and Watergate decisions are not just editorial achievements, they are operational case studies in what it looks like when a leader's institutional values are load-bearing under maximum pressure. Study Graham for decision-making under existential threat. Study her for the relationship between editorial mission and business architecture. And study her for what it looks like when a leader discovers her own capabilities through a crisis that she never would have chosen. That's your forensic audit on Katharine Graham. Remember to grab The Unfair Advantage on Amazon. Visit toddhagopian.com and stagnationassassins.com for the largest stagnation database. I'm Todd Hagopian. And remember, your values are not real until they're tested by someone who is trying to take something away from you for having them.